Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is that you're watching this. This is Left Side of the Aisle, and I'm your host, Larry Erickson. And for the next roughly half hour, not quite, I'm going to be your ranter and raconteur, talking about things that I think are worthy of your attention and maybe even doing something about. As always, any reactions to the show can be sent to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or if you prefer, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time. And the URL for that will be over here somewhere a couple of times during the show. And you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. The one thing I ask, as always, that if you do send me email, please include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is not spam, of which, like all of us, I get way too much, and be a little patient about getting an answer because I'm lousy about answering my email. So, with that, let's get to it. I'm going to start, as I always like to, whenever the opportunity arises, with some good news. And this actually happened a couple of weeks ago, but then again, I was away on vacation, so I couldn't tell you about it. So I'm going to tell you about it now. On May 22nd, voters in Ireland chose to change their constitution, making Ireland the first country to legalize same-sex marriage through popular vote. The result was overwhelming, 62% in favor, only 38% opposed. Now, Ireland had civil partnerships since 2010, but as often happens, those sorts of arrangements did not provide the same sorts of benefits and guarantees that actual marriage did. So proponents continued to press for this amendment. Now, the main opposition to this came from the Catholic Church, which is still a force in largely Catholic Ireland. Even though Pope Francis has expressed somewhat more sympathetic views toward homosexuals than previous pontiffs, that doesn't mean the Church has changed its bigoted attitude towards same-sex marriage. In fact, in the wake of the vote in Ireland, the Vatican Secretary of State called it a defeat for humanity. Now, that's relevant here because with this vote, pressure now is increasing on Italy, which is now the only nation in Western Europe to have neither civil unions nor same-sex marriage. It is also the nation in Western Europe with the largest Catholic population. About 80% of Italians describe themselves as Catholic, and the Church's political influence there remains quite strong. On the other hand, about political influence, the same thing was said about Ireland. And as in Ireland, there are signs of change in Italy. A 2013 poll showed a heavy majority of Italians in favor of some sort of legal recognition for same-sex couples, and a 2014 poll found a majority in favor of allowing same-sex marriage. And what's more, even as the national government stumbles in the face of right-wing and church opposition, some localities, including the city of Rome, have registered as married some same-sex couples who were legally married in other countries. So we'll see what happens. For the moment, this is another reason to say that I'm proud to be, part Irish, because justice is always good news. All right, now we got some more good news, along with a bit of And Another Thing, our occasional feature on cool science stuff thrown in for good measure. A group of 10 students at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland, set out to construct a robot that could climb stairs. But after meeting with a professor, the team redirected their plan from a robot that could climb stairs to a wheelchair that could. The thing is, stairs, as I'm sure you realize, are a real barrier to folks in wheelchairs, which is why we have ramps and other wheelchair-friendly provisions in our streets and sidewalks and buildings. But such accommodations are far from universal. There are still, for example, train stations that are not handicapped accessible. There are some courthouses that are not handicapped accessible. And of course, a great many private dwellings are not. So this barrier of steps is still a real barrier for a lot of folks. Well, these students gave themselves 10 months to design a wheelchair that could overcome that barrier. And as I'm sure you can tell from the fact that we're filing this here under good news, they succeeded. The chair is modeled after a Segway system. It balances on two wheels and climbs stairs using two toothed rubber tracks that actually grip onto the steps and sort of pull the chair up. The tracks are mounted to the bottom of the chair. Now, from a video of the operation of this, it seems it would take some practice to get the hang of the stair climbing process, and then you actually do have to go up the stairs backwards. But at the same time, the chair very clearly works. Now, this is not the first stair-climbing wheelchair. There was one that came out back in 2003 using a wheel-over-wheel gyroscopic system, but production was discontinued in 2009. Not only was it expensive, that chair cost like $22,000, but it required users to have use of at least one arm and some upper body control with a strong grip on a sturdy handrail, which means a significant number of wheelchair-bound folks could not use it, and even the folks who could use it couldn't do it unless there was a handrail there. Well, those physical requirements do not apply to this new chair. So if it actually does come to market, it could be a genuine breakthrough for folks in wheelchairs, and wouldn't that be good news? All right, one more bit of good news. I want to set the scene. It was an emotional debate in the state legislature. It always is on these issues, as legislators stood up and made references to religion, to morality, to conscience, and also to simple practicality and budgetary concerns. And at the end of it all, this legislature voted 30-19, the minimum vote necessary to override the governor's veto of Legislative Bill 268. Now, what does all that mean? It means that Nebraska has become the 19th state to repeal the death penalty, and the first predominantly conservative state to do so in more than 40 years. In fact, 18 conservative members of Nebraska's unicameral legislature joined with 12 more liberal members to provide the 30 votes needed for the override. It develops a small but emerging movement among conservatives of people who oppose the death penalty, either on moral or practical grounds. And Mark Hyden, he's the national director of a group called Conservatives Concerned About the Death Penalty. He predicted in the wake of the override that cases like this are going to become more common, cases where conservatives actually provide the margin of victory for repeal of the death penalty. And wouldn't that, too, be some good news? All right, so now I have to go on to an update. Back in September of 2013, I talked about the case of Hani Khan. She was fired from her job at Hollister being a wholly owned subsidiary of Abercrombie and Fitch. She was fired from her job at a Hollister store in San Mateo, California, after some corporate higher-up saw her wearing a hijab, the headscarf that some Muslim women wear as an expression of their religion. Headscarves, it seems, violated Abercrombie and Fitch's look policy, and she was given the choice of no hijab or no job. At that time, I was able to say that the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, the EEOC, had sued on her behalf and had won the case. Well, 4 weeks later, in October 2013, I then talked about the case of Samantha Eloff, who had been denied a job at an Abercrombie and Fitch's kids store in Tulsa, Oklahoma, because she wore a hijab to her job interview. The EEOC had also sued on her behalf, but this time I had to say they lost at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals after winning at the district level, because the appeals court wholly embraced the company's contention that its look policy was critical to the health and vitality of its preppy casual brand. More significantly, the court found that there was no basis for a claim of discrimination because Eloff had never explicitly asked for a religious accommodation for her wearing of the hijab, which, again, was not in line with the company's dress code. Now, exactly how she, as a job applicant, was supposed to know of this dress code and what was in it went unexplained. Now, at that time, in October 2013, I wrote, and I'm quoting myself here, "It is reasonable to think that any basically competent interviewer with this woman wearing a hijab sitting opposite them would have been aware of a potential conflict and asked if this would be a problem for her. Unless, that is, as is also reasonable to think, the interviewer deliberately did not bring up the issue in order to have a basis for not hiring her, a basis that would be stripped away if they did raise the issue and she asked for the accommodation." Now that thing, what I said there, actually became the issue before the Supreme Court. And I'm happy to tell you that on June 1st, the Supreme Court ruled overwhelmingly by 8-1 in favor of Samantha Eloff and the EEOC. The court found that the fact that Eloff did not specifically ask for religious accommodation did not prevent Abercrombie and Fitch from being sued for discrimination when it was obvious from her appearance at the job interview that the need for such an accommodation might arise. According to the court opinion, delivered by, of all people, Justice Antonin Skeletor, an employer seeking to avoid having to make a religious accommodation violates civil rights laws regarding religion, quote, even if he has no more than an unsubstantiated suspicion that accommodation would be needed, unquote. In other words, if an employer tries to do what I suggested a year and a half ago might be going on, deliberately avoid bringing up the potential conflict with the look policy, of which in fact Eloff was never told, in order to have a basis for not hiring her, while at the same time dodging claims of discrimination on the grounds that she never asked for an accommodation. The court very forcefully said, sorry, that won't fly. Now, it's important to realize that something that's not been clear, and a lot of coverage on this, even from some more reliable sites, that this decision did not find that Abercrombie and Fitch discriminated against Samantha Eloff. That wasn't the question before the court. What it does mean is that her suit for discrimination can proceed because her failure to specifically ask for an accommodation does not bar such a suit when the employer has a reasonable basis to think such an accommodation would be necessary. So what happens now is the case is sent back to the lower court for determinations on discrimination. And what this decision also means, which in the long run may prove to be the real important point, employers may find it a little harder to get away with discriminating against job applicants based on the hope that the applicants won't realize that the discrimination is occurring. All right, one more thing now. Time for the Clown Award, one of our regular features given, as always, for meritorious stupidity. This week we have the chance to show the difference between the merely stupid and the truly clownish. In an interview with the Christian Broadcasting Network a couple of weeks ago, Jeb Bush, the man who said that knowing what we know now, he still would have invaded Iraq, until knowing what we know now, he wouldn't have invaded Iraq, and who, believe it or not, is supposed to be the smarter brother, Jeb Bush told CBN that businesses should be free to refuse to sell wedding services to gay or lesbian couples. Basic principles of public accommodation be damned. Quoting him, a big country, a tolerant country, ought to be able to figure out the difference between discriminating against someone because of their sexual orientation and not forcing someone to participate in a wedding that they find goes against their moral beliefs. This should not be that complicated. Gosh, it is right now. And I can just see him going, gosh. The thing is, what this means is that he came that close to actually saying it, to actually saying out loud that in order to be tolerant, we have to tolerate intolerance. Okay, but that is just run-of-the-mill stupid. To get you a real clown, we're going to have to look elsewhere. So this week, the big red nose goes to Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. De Blasio is the ostensible progressive who waltzed into office with a jaw-dropping 73% of the vote in November of 2013. Now, before becoming mayor, he had defended the rights of protesters, including those of Occupy Wall Street, and in fact was arrested himself at a civil disobedience action protesting the closing of a hospital. Since becoming mayor, at least early on, he was openly encouraging a peaceful protest in the wake of the cop killing of Eric Garner. He even met with protest organizers. But when it comes to him, when he's the target, it's a different story. The Rockaway Beach section of Queens was particularly hard hit by Superstorm Sandy back in 2012, and protests have sprung up among people there over the pace and direction of the reconstruction. Small groups of people with signs have been coming to de Blasio's public appearances to, in the blunt words of one, get into the mayor's face as much as possible and keep pushing our agenda. So what has been the response from the administration of this champion of free speech, this champion of the voice of the people? People have been getting shoved off into so-called free speech zones, 50 yards or more from where the mayor was appearing. For example, 2 weeks ago, he held a press conference where a new stretch of rebuilt boardwalk was being opened in Rockaway. In an action condemned by the New York Press Club and the New York Civil Liberties Union, which is, you probably guessed, the state branch of the ACLU, local residents who showed up with signs were shunted into free speech zones hundreds of feet away. This is an image of the setup for that event. Now, as near as I can tell from the media descriptions of the event, the area in the lower right is the free speech zone. That is the lower right as you look at it. The lower right of the image as you look at it. That's the free speech zone. The spot indicated by the arrow hundreds of feet away is where the mayor was to appear. Shades of shrub. Hilariously, if predictably, an official from the mayor's office insisted that, quoting, the only people asked to move were those with signs that would have blocked the audience from seeing the event. In other words, the only people who were asked to move were those who would look like protesters in any media of the coverage of the event, who would look like critics of the mayor rather than adoring sycophants. I'm all for free speech. I'm all for the right of protest, except when it's about me. Bill de Blasio taking the classic stance of the classic clown. And we're taking a break. And we're back. And we're back with our other regular weekly feature, the Outrage of the Week. All right, I have to admit right at the top that I rarely watch network TV, and I'm frankly not well plugged into popular culture. So it was only recently that I heard about this brand new show on CBS called The Briefcase. In this particular pile of stinking dung, two struggling families, having been fed the lie that they're going to participate in a documentary about money, are each presented with a briefcase containing $101,000, an amount almost literally life-saving to a lot of families in need. Each family is then told they can keep all of the money, or they can give some of it or even all of it away to another family whose need may be equal to or even greater than their own. Neither family knows that the other family has been presented the same deal with an equivalent briefcase. The families are then, over a period of 3 days, each given details about the struggles of the other family, again, each of them without knowing that the other family's been giving similar equivalent details about them. And then after that, they have to decide what to do with the money. Put bluntly, each family is put through an emotional ringer, an emotional torture chamber, as they are consciously manipulated by the producers to be torn between their own needs and their concerns for others. And remember, they think they're in a documentary, being given the choice between being forever seen as solvent but cruel and heartless, or as altruistic and caring as their lives collapse under the weight of debt. And we are supposed to watch their torment, their struggle between desperation and decency for our entertainment. Executive producer David Broom had the gall to say that the show is actually about values, and that it's not about the money. It's about everything except the money. He called it an opportunity for the people involved to reflect on what's really important in their lives and to learn about themselves, as if this whole endeavor was intended as a big fat favor to them. In fact, what this is poverty porn, or as others have labeled it, a blank show of bad taste, manipulation, and voyeurism and stereotype baiting. Oh no, Broom protests. No, not true at all. Rather, quoting, we're testing the human spirit. Right, and I can imagine the Romans looking down at the gladiators in the arena and thinking, you know, this really is a test of the human spirit. One writer summed it up well, and I'm going to quote them. Make no mistake, The Briefcase is a good show to watch if you want to see a television network last valued at $30 billion ask families that are near to losing everything to battle over the very thing the network has in near endless supply: money. In fact, this show has led a number of people to ask, what's next? The Hunger Games? Okay, this isn't the Hunger Games. But I still say that this is so disgusting, this sinks so low, that I find it hard to come up with the words to express the level of contempt I have for this entire enterprise. It is beyond an outrage. All right, last for this week, something you probably expected me to lead with. As I expect you know, 3 provisions of the grossly misnamed Patriot Act have expired at the end of May, despite the efforts of the spook lovers to keep them going intact. Now, 2 of these provisions were minor ones. One is the lone wolf provision, which is where you can track somebody who has no known connection to any terrorist organization or group, and that's a provision that has actually never been used. And another one allowed for roving wiretaps, where, in effect, this was to deal with people who would buy a cheap cell phone, do something, throw that away, buy another cheap cell phone and throw that away, with the idea that you could surveil the person rather than the phone number. The big one, however, was Section 215 of the Patriot Act. This is the one that allowed for the government to demand, quote, any tangible thing, unquote, officials have reasonable grounds to believe are related to a terrorism investigation. This is the provision that the NSA used as its authorization to collect millions of domestic telephone records on an ongoing daily basis. Now, after a lot of fussing and fuming, the spook lovers, in the form of Senator Fishface McConnell, finally relented and passed the so-called USA Freedom Act, which put some restrictions on the spies after they failed 3 times to pass amendments to weaken it. The bill had already been passed by the House, so it went to Obama, who quickly signed it. This is regarded as a great victory for civil liberties and blah, 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 so forth and so on. The thing is, just as the Patriot Act would better have been called the Traitor Act for its effect on civil liberties, the USA Freedom Act would better have been called the USA Not Quite So Bad as It Was Before Act. The thing is, you got to realize a lot of civil liberties groups and privacy advocates from across the political spectrum, from the ACLU to the Tea Party, opposed the USA Freedom Act, saying what should be done is simply to let Section 215 expire and start over again, on the grounds that the USA Freedom Act does not do enough to protect privacy and involves only minimal reforms. What the bill does is it limits the NSA's collection of phone and business records. It would not allow bulk collection by state or by zip code or something like that. And what happens is the phone companies are going to keep these records. And the NSA can still search those records, but only if they get a warrant that applies to not some broad category, but to a specific person or a specific phone number. What's more, they can only track out 2 layers, not 3. That is, if they track you, they can track everyone you talk to and check everyone they talk to, whereas before it was them and them and them. So it puts a little bit of a limit on that. However, The Act still allows the agency to collect phone records if there is a, quote, reasonable articulable suspicion that the search is associated with a foreign power engaged in international terrorism, and it still allows the government to demand any tangible thing. And apart from the phone records, this is what has been used to justify these things called national security letters, where basically the government shows up and demands all the records you have about so-and-so, and this is not even with a warrant. This is on the spook's own authority. They go and it's demand, I want all the financial records. Go to your bank, all your financial records. Go to your phone, all your financial records. Go here, all your this records, all your that records, and they can collect all of this data on you and at the same time tell the people who get these national security letters that they are legally barred from ever revealing they even got it. That's unaffected by this. And there's something else that's unaffected. People just keep talking about, the Patriot Act and ending the Patriot Act. No, this ends a couple of sections. Not even an end. It amends a couple of sections of the Patriot Act. The rest of the Patriot Act, the rest of the Traitor Act stays in place. And one of the most significant ones, which was not up for renewal, this doesn't have an expiration date, this is permanent, is Section 702. Of the Traitor Act. This is the one that allows the NSA to plug directly into the internet service providers, plug directly into their output, and suck up all of this internet data. Just suck it all up. Emails, Skype conversations, video, all of it, everything, internet chats, everything. And remember, this includes the whole content as well. And that is unaffected by this. So, all right. So that's going to have to be it. We're going to talk, obviously, going to be more to talk about this as time goes on. But for the moment, we're just going to have to wrap up there. I'm going to have to say to you, you just have the best week you possibly can. We will see you next week. And as always, peace.